The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
Seeking his sixth term, United States Congressman Matt Cartwright comes to this race for Pennsylvania's 8th Congressional District as a person proven to bring home the bacon for his district, which we will be discussing today. In Congress, Matt has been committed to working across the aisle to advocate for working families. Matt's priorities include strengthening the middle class, creating jobs, ensuring quality health care, protecting seniors, and supporting veterans and military families. He has introduced over 60 pieces of legislation and more bipartisan bills than any other House Democrat. Matt serves on the powerful House Appropriations Committee and is on the Appropriations Subcommittees for Commerce, Justice, Science, Financial Services, and General Government, as well as Military Construction and Veterans Affairs. He is also a member of the House Natural Resources Committee. Matt is also one of the co-chairs of the House Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. This race is a rematch of 2020, when Matt narrowly won against his repeat adversary, Republican nominee Jim Bognett, in a race so close it took 4 days to certify a winner. In an election season predicted to be tough on Democrats, Matt will make his case for a sixth term. Prior to coming to Congress, Matt worked as an attorney with Munley and Cartwright for 25 years. He spent his time at the firm fighting for working families and served as a member of the Board of Governors of the American Association for Justice. You may remember Matt graduated magna cum laude with a history degree from Hamilton College in 1983. He earned his Juris Doctorate from the prestigious University of Pennsylvania Law School in 1986, where he was a member of the Law Review. Currently, Matt lives in Music with his wife, Marion Munley Cartwright. They have 2 sons, Jack and Matthew, and we will let him make his case directly to the people today for his retention.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Matt, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Nice to be back with
Pleasure.
you, Chuck.
Always a pleasure. I haven't talked to you in a while until setting up the show, of course, and the last time I spoke to you, you were literally speaking to me on Air Force One. You were at the President. He was in the process. I'm not sure he was infecting you with COVID, but apparently he had it at the time. So, of course, I wished you well, and apparently you avoided that. So talk about your recent traveling with the President.
Yeah, actually, they called us and they said, well, he wants to do a visit to northeastern Pennsylvania. And I said, well, you have to go to Luzerne County because you haven't been there. And I said, every time you mention Scranton, people in Luzerne County get a little more annoyed.
Of course.
And he said, you know, they were like that in Wilmington, too.
Really?
But,
I understand.
But he got better, and he did come, and we had a nice visit in Wilkes-Barre, nice little rally, and off he went.
Sure. Well, as you know, Matt, you're now a veteran of the wars, literally. You have been elected and re-elected to 5 terms. You have 10 years already under your belt. Of course, you aspire to a 6th term. That's what this show is dedicated to, basically. And as I do this time of year, now you've done so many shows. Honestly, most of them were basically policy shows, announcement shows, things you had just done shows to talk about a current issue, a current bill, and all that. A record, congressional record, clearly to be proud of. Having said that, you have done a few shows where we're engaged in the acrimony of campaigning circa 21st century. Having been in a couple myself, I have not been. I was apparently hated old people and was bad for seniors, and I heard things about me that, of course, and it reminded me from almost 30 years ago when I ran for governor, and the person that they portrayed me to be. My hair was black then, by the way, in those commercials. Don't have that anymore. But it's a tough thing for all candidates.
Well, you're right, and I think you have your finger on it. You can't believe the things people say about you, and they just make things up out of whole cloth. Part of that is the way the law works. You know, ordinary citizens, if somebody says something that's false about you and then kind of runs down, besmirches your character, you have a lawsuit. It's a defamation case.
Of course.
Depending on how bad what they say about you is. But public figures, it's different. Since about 1964 in this country, there was a case called New York Times versus Sullivan that said public figures, you can say anything at all about them, no matter how false, no matter what it's for, and usually it's just to unseat them in an election, and they can't do anything about it. My opponent, and this is true actually right now, my opponent is one of these people that would rather climb up a tree and tell you a lie than stand on the ground and look you in the face and tell you the truth.
That's, of course, he has said some things strongly about you, and that's all part of this campaign season. And it's only fair that you have a full chance, which this show is, to respond. And I wanted to segue now in this part of the show. The second half, we're going to highlight Camp Lejeune, that your fingerprints are all over in that important piece of legislation. But this half of the show, this is your basically closing statement to those folks as why you should be retained. So I'm going to let you talk to the middle camera and go ahead.
Thanks, Chuck, and thanks to the people who are listening in. Serving in the United States Congress and representing Northeastern Pennsylvania has been the honor of my life. It's 10 years now, and over that space of time, I have risen to a powerful position where I can really wield the kind of clout that Northeastern Pennsylvania needs to have. We need more money at work in our local economy. Things aren't working out so well. I mean, with the current inflation, this hurts. Inflation hurts. It is real. People experience it. You can't candy coat it. You can't spin it in any way. When you go to the grocery store and you feel like you have to get a mortgage to buy a carton of eggs, it's bad, and people are feeling it. And of course, you know, the first question is what is causing the inflation? Of course, coming out of the pandemic is the problem. But at the same time, we also have the fact that the inflation is driven by oil and gas, Chuck. Oil and gas is absolutely the driver for this inflation, and the proof of it is in the numbers. The inflation is about 8.5% to 9.5% overall. It varies, goes up and down a little bit. But 8.5% to 9.5% overall. But if you look at the oil and gas inflation, at its peak it was 32% inflation in oil and gas. What does that mean? Price gouging was going on. And I was very proud in Congress to vote yes in favor of the anti-price gouging bill that would give the Federal Trade Commission additional powers to look into and investigate that kind of price gouging that was going on. Look, it's the law of supply and demand. With supply and demand, the shorter the supply is, the higher the prices go.
Of course.
And we didn't have enough gas being produced. Well, we have the answer right here in northeastern Pennsylvania. We have all of this shale gas in the northern counties. They're in wells that were already fracked. They're in wells that are capped. They're in wells that people are just waiting to take that shale gas out of the ground and put it to use. Now, instead of packaging it up into liquid natural gas, LNG, and shipping it overseas, I think the answer is we need to keep it here. We need to put it to work right here in northeastern Pennsylvania, and I have been supporting a plant called Nacero. Nacero perfected a technique for taking the Marcellus shale gas and turning that gas through a refinement process, refining that into regular car gas. We can do that right here in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. We do that, and what you have is a lot more plentiful gas, cheaper gas, because it's more plentiful. Same thing, supply and demand. The more supply there is, the lower the price goes, and the less we get burned at the pump. And we'll be in more control of what the price per gallon is, because we'll be producing it right here in northeastern Pennsylvania. The other thing that means is a lot of jobs. This is a $6 billion plant that we're working on. The Bechtel Corporation, which is the largest construction firm in the world, is lined up to create this plant with good paying union jobs. We're talking about 4,000 jobs to create this plant because it's a $6 billion plant. that are on the drawing board right now. What I'm doing is I'm helping Nacero with a federal tax credit that's going to help them make all the numbers make sense, make everything add up the right way so that they can go ahead and do this plant. I think it's so important that we do that. Once the plant is built, and it could take 3 or 4 years to get it done, it's such a big endeavor, then you're going to have hundreds of people working there making sure it goes. Once we have that in place, we're going to have plentiful gas and lower costing gas as we go forward. Now look, there are people that believe that we can convert right to wind and solar power to fuel everything. One day we will get there, Chuck, but we're not there now. And if we interrupt the gas supply right now, you know, going up $1 a gallon really hurts people. Right. Hurts them right in the wallet. Another thing we're doing about inflation is we're bringing down costs. Costs for so many people, costs include, as a big chunk of what they lay out every month is for medicine. Medicine costs, and particularly people on Medicare, Social Security and Medicare. You've heard me sit here time after time talking about how people with dismay, they look at their annual cost of living adjustment for Social Security, and it goes up a little bit, but what happens is it gets eaten up by the premium increases in Medicare Part D, which is the pharmaceutical part. Okay? Now, why has that been going up? It's because since Medicare Part D got added, the big pharmaceutical companies don't have to negotiate drug prices with Medicare. It's astonishing. It's anti-American. It's anti-competitive. To say to the drug companies that you can tell Medicare what these drugs are going to cost, and they have to pay you or they don't get the drugs. It's astonishing. I tell people that, they can't believe it. What do you mean, Medicare can't negotiate for drug prices? All of us as Americans, it's what we do as Americans. Right. We're capitalists. Right. We love to negotiate. Right. And to say government rule says Medicare cannot negotiate drug prices with big pharmaceutical companies, to me, from the first time I heard about that, I said, that is wrong and we have to change it. Well, we have done it. Sure. We have done it. We have it's a list of drugs that we started out with that they can negotiate with, but in addition to that, capping what seniors have to pay out of pocket for medicine at $2,000 a year, something like 3,000 seniors in northeastern Pennsylvania are already paying more than $2,000 a year in copays for medication. Mm-hmm. So with the Inflation Reduction Act that we just passed through the Congress, that's going to work. We're going to bring down the cost of medicines. We're going to bring down the copays, and people will start to see savings in all of that process so that their cost of living adjustments actually mean something to them. These are the kinds of things that we're doing right now to attack this inflation. It will go away, but we don't want to just sit around and wait for it to go away. We want to be proactive and help people who are struggling under this inflation.
Sure. One of the ways that you deal with inflation, kind of a two-pronged approach is necessary. Of course, the Fed has just raised the basis point 75 points again recently. Right. Well, some of the critique, and I have to count myself in that group, of the Biden administration is you got to also kind of turn off the spigot. And the president's latest budget increases discretionary spending by, I think it's 11 or 12%. So the question would be that until inflation is under control, what do you do about kind of turning off the spigot? And I'm going to be clear on this, is that I have identified, the Trump administration put several trillion into the pandemic in the economy, so it's not just the Democrats, I want to be fair, but Larry Summers, a renowned Democratic economist, has been very outspoken about cutting down the amount of money that's inflation by definition, and I'm no economist, but is, too much money chasing too few goods and services. So, what's your thought on that? That's an issue that's in this campaign.
It's a yes and no answer. Yes, we had to spend a lot of money during the pandemic to keep people alive, to keep body and soul together for all of these people. you know, we were faced with a situation where people had to stay at home rather than go to work and get infected, come home and infect their families. It was something that both the Trump administration and the Biden administration were kind of learning as they were going. But both administrations spent money basically to keep people home. And I have no doubt that you're right about that would have had an inflationary effect. Although why they have inflation in Europe when they didn't do half as much as what we did for regular people here in the United States, that's an open question. Right. The other things, like we've done an awful lot, like the IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That's going to be transformational for this country. We have to keep up with China. We have to keep up with Europe and places on the Pacific Rim. We cannot let America fall behind. And so investing in ourselves, investing in our roads and our bridges and our sewer systems and our water systems, so that things like Flint, Michigan don't happen and kids don't get poisoned from old water systems, things like that. We have to do those things. And I've been saying that ever since I first ran for office. We have to engage in proper husbandry of the assets that we've been handed down by the greatest generation. We have to do those things, but you'll have a hard time convincing me that IIJA, which was a couple of $1 trillion, that is causing the inflation, because that's money that hasn't been laid out yet. It's not at work in the economy right now. It will be, but it'll be over a period of years, and I think it's a good thing. The other thing that you mentioned was the Fed raising the interest rates. Right. I fault them a little bit, not for raising them, but for waiting too long to raise them. I think about the seniors who have bank accounts that pay next to nothing in interest rates or certificates of deposit, CDs. Seniors are not in the stock market. They're in these fixed return investments like savings accounts or CDs. When interest rates are really, really low, like 0.5% or 1%, seniors make next to nothing on those investments, right. And that hurts. There's an awful lot of seniors in northeastern Pennsylvania who have felt that pain. I felt that as soon as we saw the ugly head of inflation rearing up, that was the time to start ticking up the interest rates from the Fed. Now, the Fed is not the Biden administration. It's not Congress. They are independent. Right, bipartisan. So I can write all the letters I want to Jerome Powell, but it's up to him.
Regrettably, and I am enjoying this discussion, we have to go to break because we want to come back and save some time at the end of the show to talk about some of the projects, and we're going to start with Camp Lejeune. Sure. So we're here today with incumbent, 5-term United States Congressman, Democrat Matt Cartwright. He's made a very eloquent case for his retention in the things he believes in. And we're going to keep giving him the mic to let him talk to you some more about some of the projects that he has sponsored and some of the money he's brought back to this area, and specifically in legislation that he helped write, the bill that deals with the tragedy of Camp Lejeune. I'm sure in fact, probably most of you have heard about that. So we'll be back after this view that I did. Thank you. A lot of attention has rightly been focused on the immigration crisis at the southern border. It's been spotlighted recently by Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, when the former bussed migrants to Washington, D.C., and the latter flew them to Martha's Vineyard. The response in those communities, though noble, mirrored the problems of their brethren along the southern border. However, the screeching of the progressive media elites, those Democratic left paragons of virtue signaling, was hilarious in its naked hypocrisy. Starting with progressive left New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd, who hissed that it was human trafficking and kidnapping. Apparently, the devastation along all of the southern border, due to the incompetence of the Biden administration's open border policy, is of no concern to Dowd. Hysterically, she actually blames American workers, stating, and I quote, "This caper by DeSantis to expose the hypocrisy of Democratic elites shows that migrants simply want to work, which a bunch of Americans don't want to do anymore," end quote. Really? As shameless as that is, even she acknowledged, and I'm quoting, The criticism that migrants coming across the border have a more severe impact in border states is valid. You think? Quoting, President Biden ignores the border, giving it to Vice President Harris to get under control. We all know that's not happening. End quote. Fellow New York Times columnist Bret Stephens, a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist, had this to say on the immigration crisis. Quote, it was not an accident of policy. It was an intention. Biden ran for president promising a path to citizenship, raising migrant expectations through the roof, setting off a predictable crisis at the border within a week of his taking office. This is political malpractice on multiple levels. The crisis at the border strains frontline communities. It strains faith in the rule of law. It makes a mockery of the legal immigration system. And it makes a mockery of people like Vice President Harris and others, making fools of themselves by trying to defend a visibly failed policy. The crisis is a failure of liberalism, classic and contemporary. It calls into question the ability or willingness of a Democratic president to solve a basic law and order issue when it conflicts with progressive pieties. End quote. Another Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, historian, and novelist, Theodore H. White, a liberal icon of the 20th century, who identified the progressive dilemma in his novel, In Search of History. He discussed his own break with the School of Liberal Journalism. He states, I quote, liberals believe for every complicated problem, there exists both an intellectual and moral solution, and that they coincide, end quote. White found out that theory, prevalent in faculty lounges and publishers' offices, doesn't translate to real life. White was expressing an issue that we all grapple with. We all know how to do what's morally right, and we all know how not to hurt people. But often it's hard to do both things at the same time. Welcome back. We're here again today with five-term incumbent Congressman Matt Cartwright. And Matt, we spent a lot of time, usually I break the show in halves, but we spent so much in the answers you gave were substantive and needed time. So we're going to have to unfortunately rush in the final part of the show on some of the money you brought back to the area and the Camp Lejeune bill that you helped draft.
Well, let's talk about Camp Lejeune first. When the tragedy came to my attention, I was shocked. Between 1953 and 1987, Marines that went to Camp Lejeune were poisoned by the drinking water there, poisoned by volatile organic compounds, xylene, toluene, benzene. Anything that ends in ENE is carcinogenic. And they came down with cancer, throat cancer, stomach cancer, bladder cancer, colorectal cancer, all kinds of cancers. It was everybody who goes for combat training in the Marines goes through Camp Lejeune. And so we're talking about, hundreds of thousands of Marines that went through Camp Lejeune, plus their families that lived on base, but plus the employees at Camp Lejeune. They drank that water at the mess halls. Their families bathed in it in the on-base housing. They filled their canteens with it out of water buffaloes out on exercise. They drank this water for months and months, all of it carcinogenic, and it went on for 34 years. And because there was no legal remedy for them, I got involved, and I wrote a bill called the Camp Lejeune Justice Act, and it allows them to have their day in court. It allows Marines, Marine families, the survivors of Marines who died or family members who died or employees at Camp Lejeune, those survivors have a chance at a day in court, and that's what it does. It took me 5 years to get it done. I got 55 Republican co-sponsors for my bill. That's the way you get things done in Congress, is you work across the aisle. I have actually, I'll give you a proud stat. I'm about to introduce my 150th bipartisan bill that I've written in Congress. I work with Republicans every day in the House of Representatives, and that's the only way you can get legislation to go. That's how we got the Camp Lejeune bill done, and I'm very proud of it.
And you should be. If the trends are accurate, and I'm not talking about your race, but nationally, that experience may come in handy dealing with Republicans across the aisle. It by every account I read, it very probably will be a Republican majority in the House.
And if that happens, to be sure, a lot of Democrats will be upset because they lose the agenda in their committees. Right. But I'm on the Appropriations Committee, and I'm one of the 12 chairs, as you mentioned, of the House Appropriations Committee. And what they say in Congress is there are Democrats and there are Republicans and then there are appropriators. Right. And the appropriators have to get along, and I do get along, and we work together and we come up with a package that makes sense for everybody. I will be included. I will be at the table even if the Democrats are in the minority in the House come January.
Well, that's a good answer and an issue we had to discuss. As we are running out of time, we went so long again in the first segment. You have a number of items you would like to talk about, and I'm going to let you talk about some of the specifics, some of the money you brought back to this area.
Well, sure. We've been talking about that for years, about the extra clout you get on House Appropriations, and as a chairman of Appropriations, the extra clout you get from doing that. We have the return of community project funding over the last 2 years. I can tell you, over the last 2 years, I've been able to bring back money for one of the most important things, and that's public safety. I believe the safety of the public is the paramount concern of any elected official.
Crime's huge right now, Matt, as you know, in this election.
I'll give you an example. I'll give you examples of what I brought home. Lackawanna County GRIP Anti-Gang Project, $2 million for aggressively combating violent drug gangs and gun violence. The City of Wilkes-Barre Police Department, $2.1 million for new tasers and dash cams to be synced with police officers' body cams. Also the Shot Spotter system, which is wonderful. It helps police figure out what's a gunshot and where's it coming from. An important thing for the Wilkes-Barre Police Department. In Monroe County, the West End Emergency Services Facility, $1 million for Broadheadsville for 10 emergency services, police and fire. Police and fire facility in Moosic for $3 million. The one they're in now is loaded with mold. The Luzerne County DA's office, the District Attorney's office, is creating a county-wide emergency first responder unit, and we got them $2.5 million to make that. The Archibald Borough Regional Police and Fire Emergency Operations Center, $3 million for that. I couldn't be prouder of helping fund our law enforcement agencies and the DA's offices for they're the ones keeping our streets safe, and we have to fund them. And people say, well, wouldn't that money be better if we just didn't reduce my taxes or something like that? Folks, that if we don't spend it here, if you don't have somebody scrapping for that money for northeastern Pennsylvania, it is going someplace else. It's going to Atlanta or Southern California or Texas or South Florida. It's going someplace else, and that's the paramount job for your member of Congress, to have the clout to get that money and bring it back so that we improve life for northeastern Pennsylvania people and give us a shot at getting back to the former grandeur that we used to have in our economy in northeastern Pennsylvania.
Well stated. As closing argument goes, well done, Counselor and Congressman.
Thanks, Chuck.
We were here today again with incumbent five-term United States Congressman from the 8th Congressional District in one of the most nationally spotlighted and contested races. It was a close call 2 years ago with Republican nominee Jim Bognett. It'll be close again. So you've heard his discussion and his closing argument effectively on why he should be retained, and not surprisingly gave a great account of himself and his accomplishments. We'll be back again next Sunday at 10:30. Thank you for listening and watching.